What's up guys, Houndish here, and today we're jumping in with some Destiny 2 news and updates. And so, firstly, game director Joe Blackburn has given us an update on the state of the game, and some things which Bungie plan to change about their approach to development and content flow based on the community's response to that. So it includes that we'll get a free PvP map pack, as well as more regular Crucible updates, changes to vendors including XUR, plus they're making next season's main Eververse armor free for everyone. And there's even more to cover there, so we'll round that up. Plus, we'll get some teasers for the upcoming showcase, and in other news, Bungie ban a streamer, hint at some new features landing in the game throughout the year. As well as that, we get a new interview about Bungie development, and there are a few other updates to cover today. So, as always guys, I hope you enjoy the video, and if you do, a rating below really helps us out. But without further delay, let's get into it. And so initially, Joe Blackburn gave a bit of an update yesterday via a video, and it's primarily a response to the community's feedback about the state of the game update, and what Bungie didn't manage to do so well in that. So it's an entire 15-minute video, but to round up the key points, he does firstly say they are disappointed with the quality of the state of the game article. He says one of the big reasons for this is that they're really busy working on the final shape. And he also said that the showcase was recorded a while ago, so it's not a reaction to anything in the state of the game or recent feedback. And he also says that the showcase is intended for a wide audience, so players shouldn't expect it to include a bunch of nitty-gritty details on the game, new systems or mechanics. But he did tease that there will be a strange coin and XUR revamp coming with the final shape. And he makes the point that the showcase won't include that information. But importantly, XUR will be getting an update, as well as that currency, which is interesting. Plus he adds that there'll be an update to the HUD, including buffs and debuffs, and how they're represented on the screen. And he indicates as well that they'll touch slightly on how the live service for Destiny 2 might change a little bit after the final shape. But he then goes on to say that they appreciate the response regarding PvP content, and they are forming a PvP strike team to be solely focused on PvP and the development objectives. And they've had strike teams in the past, like when Destiny 2 initially launched and got a lot of bad reception. They had specific teams that were tasked with sort of improving particular areas of the game. And he says the one new map and a few reprises every year is not the approach that's producing a Crucible that players expect of Bungie. And so moving forward, initially next year, there'll be a single map pack which is free for everyone, containing a few maps specifically designed with strengths in mind for different modes. So that's a huge positive right there, a bunch of new Crucible maps that are free for all players. And it says as well, some new modes that they've come up with and had in Crucible Labs or Iron Banner will be incorporated into the core PvP experience. Plus we'll see things like Countdown Rush going into comp, and they'll focus on getting modes like Rift that players are less excited about out of the rotation. But on top of that, there'll be some comp reward point structure changes, and they're looking at a more simple system where winning or losing matters most. And once again, he says there will be more info on this in the future, especially seeing that they have this specific team now focused on a lot of the feedback that the community have been talking about. So some pretty big positives there for the Crucible, and let us know what you think down below. On top of that though, he finishes by saying that they appreciate it's frustrating for players that Bungie have outlined they won't be adding new ritual armor every year. And this is something they actually decided on a few months back, but he says it was very poorly communicated, which is their responsibility. And while they plan to stick to that, and hopefully will bring other armor updates in the meantime, he said that next season, an Eververse armor set that was planned for the store in Season 22 will instead be made into a ritual reward, free for everybody to earn. So essentially they're giving away the main Eververse armor set for next season as something that can actually be earned in game. And it had indicated that it would be earnable across core rituals like Gambit, Vanguard, and Crucible. So I'd say overall a few pretty positive changes there. And if you want to check out the full video with some extra insights, I'll link it down below. It at least definitely responds to some of the core bits of feedback we've had. So I'd be curious to get your thoughts on it in the comment section. And as always, I'll keep you posted if we get further updates. Up next though, last week we got news that Keith David will be replacing Lance Reddick as the voice of Zavala moving forward. And following that news, we got a bit of an update from Keith David with a short clip on social media. So here are a few words from the new voice actor for Zavala.
Hi, I'm Keith David, and I am honored to continue the great work of Lance Reddick as Zavala. One of the great qualities of Zavala that really attracts me is his integrity and his sense of family. And I thought that Lance captured that wonderfully. And it is my intention to continue that work and to continue to bring that kind of integrity to the role. To all the fans, thank you for your support. Thank you for welcoming me into this family. Let's just continue to make this a great experience. Thank you.
Pretty cool to get a bit of an introduction right there. Of course, many folks know about Keith David already. On top of his work in TV and movies, of course he also voiced characters back in the Halo days, so pretty cool bit of Bungie nostalgia there. And it'll certainly be interesting to hear the first performances from Keith David, which I believe are likely to drop around the timeline of the final shape. So share any more thoughts you may have about that down below. In other news though, Bungie recently have banned a Destiny 2 streamer for harassing employees, creators, and other players. And there's an article here from the Game Post, who says Bungie have recently taken firm action against a German content creator and streamer. And considering this is somebody who's known in the German community, Bungie actually issued an official statement regarding it, with the ban being imposed due to the creators' disturbing conduct harassing players, but also Bungie staff and other creators in the Destiny 2 community. So, on the German Twitter account for Destiny 2, Bungie said, "We recently banned a local creator and streamer due to persistent violations of the code of conduct, specifically related to harassment of players, other creators, and Bungie employees." And they stated that the ban would not be lifted. Bungie didn't actually openly identify who they were talking about, but yet another piece of firm action right there from Bungie, and also an indication, of course, that it doesn't matter who you are in terms of personality, whether it's content creators or players, Bungie are maintaining their firm position on behavior in the community, which I think especially when you're talking about someone with a kind of amplified voice in a platform, if they are indeed ruining the experience but also threatening other individuals in the broad community, I think it's mainly a positive thing that Bungie are continuing to take this position. So give us your thoughts about that, and I'll link the Game Post article about it down below. Another interesting thing here, and we did touch on it last week, but the Game Post also shared that it seems Destiny 2 is considering an option for players to view past cutscenes within the game. And on top of the major updates they've outlined for Season 22, and of course more that we'll learn about for Final Shape, the Game Post points out if you're a new or returning player in D2, you might have felt a bit confused about what's happening in the story. And outside of that, even accessing some of the story that's already happened, especially things like cutscenes, isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do. But in the State of the Game Post in August, Joe Blackburn did confirm that Season 22 will include new ways to experience key in-game moments in Destiny 2's history to help millions of Guardians get caught up with the confrontation with the Witness. And alongside that, the D2 team account on Twitter also confirmed earlier this year that players will continue to be able to watch the Witness Origins cutscene in-game even after the current year is concluded. And given that there isn't a platform to easily kind of go back to cutscenes and things like that, it does indicate the possibility that Bungie will produce some sort of in-game cutscene archive. So it seems highly likely that Bungie will do something like that, and I think certainly that would be pretty cool. So perhaps it's something we'll hear about with the showcase coming up next week, or potentially any of the further updates that we may see this week. Give us your thoughts down below. Another interesting thing to point out from the community right here, but according to a Reddit thread by Significant Car, 59% of the items in this past season have actually belonged in the Eververse store. So they pointed out that typically during a season we get 8 cosmetic exotics, and they're things inside of the season pass, triumphs, or the story, with around 30 weapons including adepts and unsunset loot, and then 30 armor pieces and 104 Eververse items. Which means that Eververse technically, if you're talking about items alone, especially in this past season, has seen around about 60% of the total items introduced during that season, with the exception of additional purchases, so things like the dungeon key, which is certainly fairly hefty. Of course, item numbers don't speak exclusively to the quality of the game, right? They're not the only value that a season brings. But it certainly nonetheless highlights the volume of items that are arriving in Eververse versus the rest of the game, which further highlights why the community has been frustrated in recent times with this particular element. So give us your thoughts down below, we'll see what we get in Season 22. And of course, as Bungie always say, they won't have had a lot of time to react to recent feedback for Season 22, which to an extent is understandable, especially stuff from in the past month or two, but safe to say if that trend continues, player sentiment regarding the Eververse store and itemization in seasons and the overall quality of seasonal content isn't necessarily likely to improve, but give us your thoughts down below. The final thing I wanted to mention right here, but Christopher Barrett did a recent interview on The Fourth Curtain, where he sat down on the podcast to talk a little bit about working for Bungie and his history with the company. And of course, Chris Barrett is currently the game director for Marathon, and he previously has been game director for Destiny expansions. but was also the art director for Destiny 1, and is one of the folks that really kind of conceives different potential projects for Bungie and helps turn them into a reality, which was much like that in the Destiny franchise. So he said, between 1,500 and 2,000 people are currently working on various titles in the studio, which is a massive increase over the past couple of years. He also added that 20 to 25% of those are remote workers, best he knows, so anywhere up to around a quarter of the development team at Bungie are actually working remotely, which is interesting. And in the podcast, which I'll link below, he talks about Destiny 1 and how it was received, and fairly openly said that they'd almost taken on too much with Destiny, and one of their issues with the game was that it was very hyped up, which was also a potential mistake of theirs, and when D1 launched, which he did recognise was in somewhat of a rushed state, Bungie ultimately understood why it wasn't received the way they wanted it to be, and it reflects on how it took quite a long period of time to get the game the broad acclaim that it has now. So there's some interesting insights into that early development phase for Destiny in general, but he also talks about the development of Marathon, and he said that it's been in dev for a while, but from the sort of concept stage to where they are with the title right now, it's taken nowhere near as long as Destiny did. He also speaks about how it's really exciting to bring back an old Bungie franchise, but he recognises as well that there is a risk element there, going for a different type of title. And he confirms as well that Joe Cross is the art director for Marathon, and Joe also worked on art direction in Destiny, where initially Chris Barrett actually had that role. But much like we saw with the original Destiny, Marathon is Chris Barrett's baby, if you like, so its initial development started with him on his own, coming up with the concept for the title, what the overall goal of the game is, but also the art direction. And he speaks about pitching that idea to the team, but also moving into a director's role, where his job is pulling different teams together to sort of create cohesion in the project. And with that dev team growing so significantly over the past couple of years, his current role on Marathon is very holistic. And he also speaks about how Marathon isn't simply a game title, but it's an entire new IP, which sort of suggests there is a lot of potential for Marathon in different formats, much like we've seen in Destiny. Bungie are hoping that this title will be around for quite some time. And it's curious as well that he talks about how this is the first time Bungie have ever been working on multiple titles at once, at least in terms of having one live game which they plan to continue to support, but then developing an entire IP that they want to run alongside that. So it's safe to say a lot is changing at Bungie. They also speak about the various different partnerships they've had, from Microsoft back in the day with Halo, to partnering up with Activision, some of the kind of friction and difficulties on getting a project to launch with two big firms like that, the transition to Sony owning Bungie. And there are some really interesting, very sort of broad insights into what it's like to work with Bungie and how it's changed over the years. So I just thought it was worth a quick mention, but if you're into game development, and especially the history of Bungie, and Chris Barrett's work on multiple different titles, it's certainly worth a listen, and I'll link it down below. But for today, guys, that is everything we have to speak about. So as always, I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you have, a rating below really does help us out. Also be sure as well to get subscribed, and I'll keep you posted with more Destiny content. But otherwise, thank you for tuning in today, and I will catch you guys very soon.